Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I'm finally doing my Q&A, so thank you to everybody who left me questions. You guys asked some really good questions and I'm really excited to answer them. I may not be able to get to all of them because I tend to talk a lot and tell a lot of stories, and I don't want this video to be like a million years long, so we're gonna see how many I can get through in a reasonable amount of time. And I'm sorry if I can't get to your question, but we're gonna see what we can get done. So the first question is actually a couple of questions that a few people asked kind of similar things. So a couple of people asked, like, what was the first book that I fell in love with? What was the first book that got me into fantasy? Or what was the first book, like the first YA fantasy I remember reading in middle school? And they're all the same answer, so I thought I'd answer them together, which is The First Test by Tamara Pierce, which is the first book in the Protector of the Small Quartet. And that is the first book that I really got into reading on my own when I was about 11 years old. And Tamara Pierce's books are really what got me into reading. Actually, I think one of the people who asked this question said that the Protector of the Small series is what got them into fantasy too, so same. Like, it's amazing. But I love Tamara Pierce, and she was like a big part of my childhood and reading journey. And speaking of Tamara Pierce, someone asked what is a book or series that I read as a kid that I would want to reread to see if I like it better now, or if it's like changed for me. And to some extent I've been doing this with a lot of books. Actually, I've been trying to reread a lot of old favorites that I haven't read for like, you know, 10 plus years, but I would actually really like to reread some Tamara Pierce books because I have read her most recent one that was released last year, but some of the older ones I would really love to reread and revisit because they were like a really big part of my childhood and my reading. Then someone else asked if I have any new favorite book tropes that I thought I'd never like, but I do. And I don't have one that I thought I would dislike, but one that I never really paid attention to, even though a lot of people talk about it, is the like enemies to lovers or hate to love romance kind of dynamic. I've just like never really thought about that trope that much, but then I recently read a book, The Binding. It doesn't exactly have enemies to lovers, but there is a little bit of like a hate to love romance, and it was just really fun. And so now I kind of want to specifically look for more like hate to love romances because yeah, that was a really fun one, and I just like never really paid attention to that trope before, even though I know it's a really popular one. Then I got a question that was, what are a couple of pet peeves that I have in publishing, whether it's like in book design and construction or something like that. And one thing that's not exactly a pet peeve, but I'm not a big fan of hardcover books. I know that like there's a whole debate in the booktube community about hardcover versus paperback. I love paperbacks more. I actually really love mass market paperbacks, which I feel like is kind of an unpopular opinion, but mass market paperbacks are actually my favorites. I love like how convenient they are, and I also really love that there's something very simple and unassuming about mass market paperbacks that I just really enjoy. But I always get really frustrated that the hardcovers are released first, and then you a lot of times have to wait for like a year to get a paperback edition of the same book. And I'm like I just want the paperback right away. And a lot of times I will wait a year to get the paperback, or order it from someplace else, like on Book Depository. A lot of times you can get paperback UK editions early, so sometimes I'll do that as well. Then I had two questions that were a little bit similar, so again, I'm going to kind of answer them together, but I'm going to have to read these because they're kind of longer. So one is, what is a super specific genre or kind of story you'd like to see more of? And the other is, what's something that you desperately want to see in a book but haven't found yet, slash haven't liked a book with that element, character, trope, what have you. So one thing that I think will be a surprise to nobody that I really want to see in a book is that I've been looking for high fantasy with Jewish characters, or high fantasy that the fantasy world is kind of based on Jewish tradition and culture. And so that's something that I guess is kind of specific that I have really been searching for. I have found a few that like sort of fall into this category, and I'm really excited about those, but they also make me very apprehensive because I have yet to find a book that I think does that kind of rep well. Something else that is like a very specific thing I love in books and I would love to see more of is there's this kind of trope that's like a healer wise woman character who like lives in the forest or like lives by herself, and then a lot of times she'll like take in an apprentice or like some young girl who doesn't have a family or something, and she like raises her and teaches her about like magic or even just like about healing and herbalism and those kind of things. And I love that trope. I have two like middle grade books that follow that kind of trope. One of them is Wise Child by Monica Furlong, and the other is The Forest Wife by Teresa Tomlinson, I think. And those are both ones that I read when I was little, and I love that kind of storyline, and I would love to see more of those, but especially I would love to see more of those that were like YA to adult, because both of those are middle grade and I love them, but they're also like very, very short. So I would love to see more books like that, and books that are like longer and really expand on the story and expand in like the depth of like the information about like healing and herbalism, and if it has magic in it. It doesn't even really have to have magic in it, but like if it does, that kind of stuff too, I would love that. Then someone asked, what Grishaverse ship do I like better, Mal and Alina or Inej and Kaz? And for this one, definitely Inej and Kaz. I don't hate Mal and Alina the way a lot of people do. I just don't care about them at all. But I did really like the Kaz and Inej ship, so definitely they are my favorite of those two ships. Then someone else asked, what is the most inspiring nonfiction book that I have read? And one that I've read recently that I really loved was Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. I talked about this in my March wrap-up. I've really been loving Brene Brown's books recently because she writes a lot about vulnerability and shame and connection and resilience and like all of that kind of stuff. And I really love that kind of thing. I think it's really interesting and it's given me a lot to think about. And also like vulnerability is something that I am working on. So it's been a really interesting book to read, and I've read a couple of her books, and Dare to Lead has been my favorite one by her so far. And someone else asked, what character in either books, movies, television do I most relate to? So I have a few that I like partially relate to. I don't know if you remember, there's one point like, you know, a couple years ago, I feel like, where it was going around the internet like describe yourself in 3 characters, and the 3 characters that I always used were Bones from the TV show Bones, so I guess Dr. Brennan, Dharma from Dharma and Greg, and Oz from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And of those 3, I think that I'm probably most similar to Oz. I think we have very similar personalities. I think we have a really similar sense of humor. I think that we handle like emotions in a very similar way, but I also think he's a very self-aware person. So I think that of those 3, he's the one that I feel I am most similar to. And then some other characters that I definitely relate to. I don't feel like anyone's gonna be surprised if I bring up the Raven Cycle and the Gangzy, and those characters like Adam, Blue, and Gansey. I definitely identify with pieces of all of them, maybe not them completely, but I feel like each of them kind of is like a little piece of me, which is part of why I love them so much. And I think the first time that I read the series, I identified most with Adam. There were definitely times, especially times where he tends to kind of repeat to himself this phrase where he goes, I am unknowable. And that is a thing that every time he would say that, I would be like, Adam, you're so dumb, but same. Like, it's one of those things that I think every time he said that, I thought he was being so ridiculous, but also I know that feeling. I also think I'm being ridiculous when I think things like that. But the second time reading the series, because I just recently reread all of it, I actually found myself really identifying with Gansey a lot. I've always really identified with Blue, partially because of her stubbornness, because I'm an extremely stubborn person, but a lot of it really is because of the way that Blue observes people and the way that she thinks about people and the way that she like thinks about and describes her friends. Like, feels very much like the way that I think and the way that I think about people and observe people. And then someone else asked, what author would you want to write a book about you, either fiction or nonfiction? And so this is kind of related, I guess, to my last answer, which is I would love for Maggie Stiefvater to write a book about me, because I relate so much to the way that Blue thinks about people and describes people. I think that Maggie Stiefvater would be able to like capture that, and because I do feel like the way that she writes her characters I love so much, but I also feel like, yeah, I can really identify with pieces of each of them, so I feel like she would do a really good job, and I also just love her writing, so I would love for her to write a book about me. So now we're getting into some non-bookish questions. Someone asked, what would your ideal day consist of? And this one I thought was really interesting because I've been thinking about it, and it made me realize, like, I have no idea. I don't know what my ideal day would consist of, because to me an ideal day is less about like specific things that I'm doing and more like how I'm feeling that day, because my favorite days and my ideal days are the ones when I feel most present in my life. I don't know if this story is going to make sense to anybody, but there was one time where I was coming home from work, and I take the train to and from work, and it was one day, I think this was like a year or two ago in the summer, and I got on the train, and usually trains at rush hour would be like packed, but for some reason this one had almost nobody on it, and I got to sit in like my favorite place, because I have a very specific way that I like to sit on trains. So I got to sit in like my favorite spot on the train, and it was one of the like nice air-conditioned, new clean looking trains. There weren't like tons of other people around, and it was just such like exactly what I wanted. And I remember sitting there thinking, you know, this is exactly my favorite way to sit on the train, and this is like the best of all situations for commuting, so I should really appreciate this. So I didn't listen to any music, I didn't read a book, I didn't do anything. I just sat there for the whole train ride, really taking in how much I enjoyed having exactly the seat that I wanted, exactly the circumstances that I wanted for riding a train. And I remember thinking like how incredible that day was. And I remember that day still, and it wasn't because what I was doing was so exceptional, because I was just commuting home from work, but it was more because of the feeling that I had, that I felt so present, that I was not distracted by anything. I was able to be so present in the moment, and I could really appreciate the like small joys of my commute, I guess. So hopefully that story explained something and made sense as to why I was telling it, because it's sort of that experience of feeling present and being able to really appreciate every moment that you're in that makes a day like an ideal day. But there are certain activities that give me that feeling of presence. So one of them is being able to be out in nature, especially out in like a wooded area, so like in the woods or forest kind of area. And another ideal day would be a day that I have a project that I'm working on that I'm really excited about and I'm really like invested in, and I have time, just like the entire day, to just devote myself to this project, because a lot of times doing like creative projects, because I do a lot of crafting kind of things, I sew and make costumes and stuff like that, those create like flow experiences for me. If you're not familiar what flow means, so flow is actually like a psychological term, not just like flow, like, oh, water flows, but flow as in the psychological term was theorized by somebody that has a very long name and I can't remember off the top of my head, so I'm gonna put it on the screen. But flow is this kind of like experience and there are a lot of different characteristics that define a flow experience, but some of the most important ones are that it's an activity that the level of difficulty perfectly matches your ability. So it is difficult enough that you stay interested and engaged, so it's not boring, but it's not so difficult that you feel you can't accomplish it. There also have to be markers in the activity so you know whether you are accomplishing it or not. But one of the most important elements of a flow experience is a loss of time, you kind of lose track of time. So it can be a situation where you feel like you've been working on a project for like an hour, but it's actually only been 20 minutes. Or where you feel like you've only been working on a project for like 20 minutes, but it's actually been a whole hour. But it's an experience that you are so engrossed in a project or an activity, and you lose that sense of self-consciousness that you're just kind of part of this activity, and you have a warped sense of time. And flow experiences are actually really interesting to research, but I love flow experiences, and they are an experience of like extreme presence. It's kind of different from the other experiences of presence that I was describing, but I often experience a feeling of flow when I do creative projects, especially sewing projects. I feel like I've been working on it for an hour or two, but it's actually been like the whole day. And I really love those kind of things. So maybe that would be another like ideal day. Someone also asked, is Huck your legal name or is it a nickname? And I was actually wondering if somebody was going to ask this. So Huck is actually a childhood nickname, but I've always really liked it, so I hung on to it. Then my friend Kathleen asked, what Hogwarts house am I in? Because this is something we have talked about many times, that I think a lot of people may assume that I am a Hufflepuff because I like yellow a lot and because my channel is Badger Reads, but I'm actually not a Hufflepuff. I am a Ravenclaw. It was completely accidental that my channel has kind of like a Hufflepuff vibe to it. I didn't even realize that until I started getting comments from people about me being a Hufflepuff, but I just really happen to love yellow and badgers. Someone else asked what is a song that I consider formative in my life, and I don't have a single song that I would consider formative. I'm not much of a music person, although my life has a lot of music in it because my whole family is very musical. Both of my parents are musicians. They actually met because they were in a band together. All of the kids in my family, so I have 3 older siblings, we all play instruments because my parents had a rule that all of us had to learn how to play at least one instrument in our lives. A genre of music that was very formative for me was like Celtic music, because a lot of the music that my family plays is Celtic music. My family has no like Celtic heritage, but we all played Celtic music, and so Celtic music has been very influential to my life. It's definitely influenced the kind of music that I like and the kind of music that I listen to now. It's very nostalgic for me, and it's also, you know, I've had a lot of experiences because of Celtic music, because I play it, and I have made friends because of Celtic music and all of that. So I don't have a specific song, but that is a genre of music that has been very influential for my life. Then another question was, what are some of my passions outside of reading? And I gotta tell you, I have a lot of hobbies. I have a lot of things that I do and I'm really excited about, but some of the ones that I have been really into recently, well, one is that I play music. I play the Celtic harp, and I kind of go in and out of being passionate about that, but I'm kind of like trying to get back into it right now. Another one, of course, I've mentioned is sewing and doing different kinds of crafts, really costume making. The majority of it is usually sewing, but there are a lot of other pieces that go into it, a lot of other kinds of skills and crafts and other kinds of things that go into creating a whole costume. And to not go on forever, I'm just gonna mention one more, which is I am really passionate about green beauty and clean beauty. So natural skincare and makeup. I'm really passionate about healthy living and how that translates into clean skincare and makeup. So that is something else that I really love, and I'm always trying new things, and I actually kind of want to talk more a little bit on my channel about maybe, although I also am probably going to be starting a beauty blog with my friend Kathleen, who is also into green beauty, and so hopefully that will be coming soon. Then someone asked, how did I decide what I was studying in school? And that's a good question, because I talk about being in grad school all the time, but I haven't really talked about what I am in grad school for. So I am getting my master's in industrial and organizational psychology, which a lot of people don't really know what IO-Psych is. And IO-Psych is essentially like the psychology of the workplace, and it can kind of take two forms. One of them is the industrial side of industrial and organizational, and that is more like HR, human resources kind of stuff. So it has to do with like assessment, hiring, promotion, firing, like legal issues, all of that kind of stuff. And then there's the organizational side, which is focused more on like corporate culture, team building, leadership coaching and leadership development, all of those kind of things. I'm more interested in the organizational side. So the way that I got into IO-Psych is that I was a psychology major in my undergrad, but I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with it, but I knew that I did not want to go into research or into clinical. So I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with a psych degree, especially because with psychology, you kind of need an advanced degree of some sort in order to do anything in psychology. And I really wanted something where I could use some of my interests and my trainings. So I am actually trained as a certified MBTI practitioner, or Myers-Briggs type indicator. I just always call it MBTI. So I'm trained as an MBTI practitioner, and I really love talking about personality, and I love facilitating workshops and things like that. So I wanted something where I might have the opportunity to facilitate workshops and talk to people about personality and other kinds of things like that. But I also am trained as a mindfulness teacher, and that is also something that you can do workshops on mindfulness and healthy living and stress management. So I got into IO psychology because of that organizational side that is focused more on corporate culture, and also in that area is a subsection of like organizational wellness or workplace wellness, which I'm also very interested in, and mindfulness, teaching mindfulness at work is something that can very much fall under workplace wellness. You can also use mindfulness and other personality assessments and things for things like leadership coaching and leadership development. So that's kind of how I got into industrial and organizational psychology. Then someone asked if I was a ghost, where would I haunt? And like, definitely a forest. Like I would haunt trees. I would haunt a forest, but I probably wouldn't be like a mean ghost. If I was a ghost, I probably would just ignore everybody and just be like, yes, I'm one with the trees. Like that would be my ghost life, and it would be amazing. Then I got a couple of questions about my style and the way that I dress. So one of them was, have I always dressed this way, or did I dress differently when I was younger? And I have not always dressed this way. It's really only in the last like 1 to 2 years that I have been dressing like this, and it has even over that time, it's been kind of evolving. But I've gone through a lot of different fashion phases. A lot of them were really bad. I had an emo phase, I had a hipster phase, I had multiple hippie phases. I also had a brief phase where I wanted to be goth, but I did it so badly. And there was a phase that was sort of romantic, Victorian inspired. Like there were a lot of different fashion phases that I've had, and none of them looked very good. And I think that a lot of why that is because I never fully committed to a look, to an aesthetic. And this time I have tried really hard to like fully commit to the way that I dress. And part of why I have been doing it differently this time is because my perspective has kind of shifted. Because now I treat the way that I dress, the way that I present myself as a form of self-care. And it is more than just like an aesthetic, as much as I love aesthetics, but it is really a form of self-care, a way of aligning the way that I look with the way that I feel. So I always view the way that I dress less as self-expression and more as personal alignment. Then somebody else asked, how did I hone my personal style? And that is a process, which I am still in the process of, because I think it changes over time. And for me, honing my personal style has taken a lot of time, a lot of effort in like figuring out what works for me and what doesn't, and like why certain things work or not. And it really has been a labor of love for myself. And it's really been a mix of figuring out what it is that I like, how I want to dress, what is the aesthetic and the vibe that I want to go for, and also what is it that looks good on me, and kind of finding the combination of those two things, because I know there are certain kinds of silhouettes that look better than others. So I've done a lot of research, trial and error, to figure out what kind of fabrics and silhouettes look best on me, what kind of colors look best on me, because like I know that warm colors always look best on me, which is great because warm colors are my favorite colors, so that's perfect. And part of it has been finding things that inspire me, whether it is specific people or whether it is other things that just kind of like the vibe of them inspire me. I've definitely developed a feeling as to what is the vibe that I want when I am dressing, and the vibe that I imagine, if you want to know, I hope this makes sense. I think of my style as being very naturey, very nature inspired and kind of whimsical. So I am kind of going for a vibe of being like in a forest or in a garden, but a very specific kind of part of it. I don't generally think of it as like the top part of like the forest or the garden, like the part that has all of like the branches and leaves, or the part that's all like if there are bushes with like flowers and leaves and things like that. The vibe that I imagine is more like if you're in the forest floor or something like that, where there are ferns and moss and there are leaves, like decomposing leaves on the ground, but there's like rich earth down there. Or if you're in a garden, the space that is like, if there are flower bushes, there's the space under the bushes where it's kind of dark, but again, you have like the rich soil under there, and you might find like insects or snakes or other kinds of things that are like part of nature and part of garden, but not like the bright, shiny, pretty, poofy part, if that makes sense. And so that's sort of the vibe that I am going for and that I imagine when I am picking clothes, when I am getting dressed, when I am putting together outfits and things like that. I don't know if that comes across in the way that I dress, but that's kind of like what I'm going for, and the vibe that I want to, the feeling that I want to have when I get dressed. So when I am buying clothes or jewelry or other parts of my outfit, I like to think like, does this give me that feeling? And also, there are certain clothes that I put on where I can feel like once I put it on, like this feels wrong. Not that the clothing doesn't fit, or that it looks bad, but it is not me. And I have a very distinct feeling of what that feels like when I put something on and I'm just like, this doesn't feel right to me. And a lot of times, I think a lot of people may have that experience, like especially if you have to wear like a uniform for a job, or if you have to dress a certain way for a particular like event or occasion or something like that. And sometimes you have to put on an outfit and you're just like, this just feels wrong to me. And so there are certain clothes that I can put them on and just go like, nope, that feels wrong. And then there are other clothes that I put on and I go, this feels like me. And knowing what are the clothes that you go, this feels like me, is really what has helped me to figure out how I want to dress, and the clothes that give me that vibe that I want. And that has also really helped me to distinguish between the clothes that I like, or aesthetics that I like, and the ones that are me. Because there are lots of different aesthetics that I love to look at and I love to see other people wear, but it's not me. And so really working on that self-awareness to know what feels like me, what feels right, was really important. And sometimes, again, that takes some trial and error. There are a lot of clothes, especially at the beginning of this whole process, where I bought a lot of clothes that I ended up giving away a couple months later because I realized that they weren't right. Because at that point I wasn't as clear on what feels like me. So yeah, I hope that explained how I honed my personal style. It's a lot of that, just like what is the vibe that I wanted, what feels right on me, finding things that inspire me, whether they are people and fashion related or not at all, but like what inspires me. And then someone also asked, what is my favorite piece of jewelry? And I love jewelry. That is usually my favorite thing in my outfit. I wear the same necklaces pretty much all the time, but my favorite jewelry is actually these earrings that I am wearing right now. I can insert a picture up here of them a little more up close. So these earrings are from one of my favorite jewelry makers, which is, I think her name's Marcy Kentz. I'll link her Etsy shop down below. I get almost all of my jewelry from Etsy. I love Etsy and I love Marcy Kentz and her jewelry. It is so amazing, and it's kind of expensive. Like if I was able to, I would just buy like all of her stuff, but I have to restrain myself because I can't afford that. But I really love her jewelry and her earrings. These ones specifically have little moths on them. These are, I think they're called Death's Head hawk moths. They're the kind that have like the little skull on their back. So I really love these earrings. I love all of my earrings from her because I feel like they have just the right mixture of like nature, whimsical, and a little bit creepy that I love. But yes, so these are currently my favorite earrings, but I love so many things from Marcy Kentz and her shop. Pretty much all of my favorite earrings are ones that are by her. All right, so I'm going to end this Q&A here. I think I got through the majority of the questions, but I have been talking for over an hour, so I'm gonna have a real time editing this. But thank you all so much for your great questions, and thank you for watching this video. I'm sure it is going to be a long one. So if you have made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.